Montana Territory, July 1882. The train hissed as it pulled into the station at Dry Creek, a lonely outpost tucked into the jagged shoulders of the Rockies. Dust swirled up from the platform as the last passenger stepped off, a young woman in a plain blue dress, clutching a carpetbag and staring into the heat-thick air like she was trying to spot her future through it. Her name was Rhea Vaughn, and she'd traveled over 1,000 miles from Missouri, answering a letter from a man she had never met. She stepped off the platform, blinking hard. The sun was harsh, the land wide and unforgiving. Her boots crunched on gravel. A horse nickered nearby, and two men stood not far from the station, just beyond the shade cast by the depot's overhang, one with his arms folded tight across his chest, the other standing easy, hat tipped back, eyes on her like he already knew her. The man who had sent the letter stepped forward. He had a pressed shirt and worry on his face. "Miss Vaughn?" he asked, voice low but clear. "Yes," she said, drawing her shoulders square. "You must be Mr. Caleb Martin." He nodded, then looked away, rubbing his jaw like it hurt to speak. I need to be honest with you right now," he said. "I sent for you when I thought I was ready. But I have 2 young children, and since my wife passed last winter I thought I could do this. But I am not ready. I am real sorry." Rhea blinked. "You changed your mind." "I did." He looked ashamed. "I should have known better. You came all this way and He stopped because the man beside him stepped forward. "I would not let her stand there like that," the second man said. His voice was warm but strong. He looked at her like she was not a mistake but something rare. "You came all this way, Miss Vaughn. I am not the man who wrote you, but I am the one standing here now. My name is Paxton Dyer, and I swear, you are all I would ever want." Rhea's breath caught. Her grip tightened on the handle of her bag. For a moment no one spoke. The wind kicked up dust around her hem. Caleb cleared his throat. "Paxton works my land with me," he said. "He is a good man. I am not asking her to decide anything now," Paxton added gentler. "But you came here for a life, did you not? Let me take you to the ranch. Let you meet the children. Let you breathe a little. Then you can decide what you want." Rhea looked between them. Caleb looked like he wanted to disappear. Paxton looked like he wanted her to stay. "I will not leave a woman stranded," Paxton said. That settled it. "I will come," she said. They rode back together in the wagon. It was a long, dusty road, winding through pine and open grass, and Paxton asked only one question the whole ride. "Why did you come?" Rhea held the carpetbag in her lap. "Because I wanted somewhere to belong." He nodded once like he understood that from the bone out. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was low. The house was modest but clean. A boy, maybe 6, sat on the porch steps with a stick in his hand and a gap where his front teeth should be. A little girl, younger, leaned against the post, watching shyly. "Foster Faye," Caleb called as he stepped down from the wagon. "This is Miss Vaughn." Foster squinted. "Is she our new mama?" "No," Caleb said quickly, then looked to Rhea. "She's a guest." Paxton helped her down from the wagon, his hand warm around hers. Rhea crouched to the children's level. "Hello, I am Rhea." Faye leaned closer. "You smell like flowers." "I had a sachet in my trunk," Rhea said with a small smile. That night they gave her the guest room. Paxton brought her a basin of water and a lantern. When he set it down, he did not leave right away. "I meant what I said, Rhea," he murmured. "You are not an obligation. Not to me." She looked up at him, candlelight softening the lines of his face. His eyes were kind, steady. "I believe you," she said. The next morning, she helped with breakfast. Faye clung to her skirt, and Foster asked if she could read him a page from the old book on the shelf. She did. Later, when Caleb went into town, Paxton stayed behind, working fence posts. Rhea brought him water. He took the cup, drank deep, and handed it back. "You do not have to make yourself useful," he said. "I do not like sitting still," she replied. He smiled. "Then we will get along just fine." That afternoon, a storm rolled in fast and mean. The wind howled through the pines and sent chickens running for cover. Faye started crying when the thunder cracked, high and sharp. Rhea scooped her up without thinking, held her close, rocked her softly near the hearth. Paxton watched from the doorway, arms folded. He did not say anything, but something in his face shifted. That night after supper, Foster tugged her sleeve. "Will you stay?" Rhea looked at Caleb, who looked away. She looked at Paxton, who met her eyes. "I want to," she said. The next few days passed soft and quiet. Rhea took to the rhythms of the ranch, helping Faye with her braids, showing Foster how to hold a pencil right, mending shirts by the firelight. Paxton worked hard each day, returning with dust at his collar and a smile just for her. One morning, Paxton found her in the garden, pulling weeds. "You are not just passing through, are you?" he asked. She brushed soil from her hands. "I do not think I ever was." He stepped closer. His voice dropped. "I was not looking for someone, but then you showed up, and it felt like I had been waiting the whole time." Rhea's cheeks warmed. She met his eyes. "I did not come for you, but I think I might stay for you." He nodded slowly, like it settled something deep inside him. And then Faye came running down the hill, tripping over her boots. Foster fell in the creek. Paxton was already moving before she finished. They found Foster clinging to a rock, water rushing fast around him. Rhea gasped and reached out, but Paxton was already in the water, boots and all, pulling the boy free. Foster clung to his neck, coughing. Later, inside, wrapped in a blanket and shivering, Foster looked at Paxton with wide eyes. "You came for me." "Of course I did," Paxton said, brushing the boy's wet hair back. Rhea stood nearby, her hand at her heart. That night, after the children were asleep, Paxton found her on the porch. "You saved him," she whispered. "I would do it again," he said. "I believe you." They looked out at the stars. The silence stretched. "I think I have already fallen in love with you," he said quietly. She turned to him, eyes shining. "I think I have too." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. Neither of them let go. By the third week, Rhea had stitched herself into the folds of their days as if she'd been written there from the start. The high summer heat pressed down without mercy, drawing long afternoons that shimmered with flies and the scent of sun-warmed hay. She rose before the bell of dawn, her hands moving with quiet purpose through the kitchen, and when the air cooled enough in the evenings, she sat on the back step with her mending balanced on her lap, listening to the coyotes call from the far hills. Paxton had taken to walking the fence line just before dusk, and she often found herself watching the rise and fall of his stride as he returned. He never came empty-handed. A handful of eggs, a crooked horseshoe, once a feather so pale it looked like cloud bone. He offered these things without explanation, and she tucked them away without asking. One evening, the wind picked up early, pulling dry leaves across the yard in restless spirals. She found him in the shed, oiling the harness leather by lantern light. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, lingering in the doorway. "You didn't," he replied, eyes steady on the buckle in his hand. "I like the company." She stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of tallow and dust. "Do you ever wish you'd been born elsewhere?" He paused, then set the strap aside. "No. I belong to this land like a stone belongs to the riverbed. I shift, sure, but I stay." She folded her arms. "I don't know if I belong anywhere." He didn't look away. "You do now." She didn't speak for a moment, the quiet holding her like water. You always speak like that, she said finally. Like everything you say is already true. I don't believe in saying things I don't mean. She glanced down at his hands, the oil sheen on his fingers. You said you hadn't been looking for someone. I hadn't, he said. But I know what it feels like to find something you didn't know you needed until it's standing in front of you. The lantern hissed faintly in the silence that followed. She turned toward the door, heart thick in her chest. But before she stepped out, she asked, "Have you always been this sure?" "No," he said, "but I'm sure now." The next day, Rhea saddled the bay mare by herself. Caleb had taken the wagon into the canyon to barter for seed grain, and Paxton was out past the North Ridge. She left a note for the children with the neighbor woman who came most mornings to help with the wash, then set off toward the creek with a basket and a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress tucked under her arm. She rode slow, letting the mare pick her path through the hollows where the grass grew high. Her skirts gathered dust, and she felt the sun on the back of her neck, the quiet pressing into her in a way that felt kind. By the time Paxton found her, her boots were off, and her toes were dipped in the muddy edge of the water. The book lay open beside her, and the basket brimmed with wild strawberries. "I thought you might be here," he said, reins in one hand, his shirt damp at the collar. She didn't rise, just looked up at him. "I wanted to see if the dogwoods were still blooming." He tied the horse and sat beside her, knees bent, forearms resting on them. "They're late this year," he said. "I noticed." He plucked a berry from the basket. "You seem lighter today." She leaned back on her elbows. "Some days it feels like the weight I carried just fell off somewhere between the train and here." "That's how you know it's real," he said. "When something good doesn't feel like a debt you have to pay." She turned her head to look at him. "Was it hard for you? After your mother passed?" He nodded once. "Took me a long while to stop waiting for her voice in the house." "Is that why you stayed on with Caleb?" "Partly. And partly because I didn't want to go nowhere just to be alone." She reached out, brushing a bit of clover from his cuff. "You aren't alone anymore." He caught her hand before it fell back. "Neither are you." They stayed like that, hand in hand, until the sun began to dip and the light turned amber. When they rode back, her basket sat empty between them, the berries gone and the silence full of something that didn't need words. That night, Foster couldn't sleep. Rhea sat with him on the edge of his bed, her hands smoothing the quilt over his legs. "I keep thinking about Mama," he whispered. She didn't hush him, didn't tell him not to feel it. Instead, she asked, "What do you remember best?" He sniffled. "She used to hum while she brushed Faye's hair." Rhea nodded. "Would you like me to hum something for you?" He hesitated, then nodded too. She did. A tune from her childhood, slow and steady, the kind you could ride like a boat over sorrow. Outside the door, Paxton leaned against the wall, eyes closed, listening. Later, when the house had gone still, he found her in the kitchen, pouring the last of the warm milk into a tin cup. "You make them feel safe," he said. She handed him the cup. "They make me feel needed." He drank, then set the cup aside. "I want to build something with you, not just a roof and walls. A life." She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped closer, close enough that her voice dropped. "Then ask me, when you're ready." He reached up, let his hand rest against the side of her neck, his thumb behind her ear. "I'll ask you when I've carved the rings, not before." She smiled, the kind that settled deep. "I'll wait," she said. "But I won't wait forever." "You won't have to." The first frost came early. A thin crust of ice rimmed the troughs at dawn, and the cottonwoods lost their leaves in a single night, gold fluttering down like paper prayers. Rhea stood on the porch with her shawl tight across her shoulders, watching the light creep over the ridge. From inside came the low clatter of morning Paxton moving about, Boots on the plank floor, Foster's sleepy voice, Faye humming to herself as she always did when she thought no one was listening. When Paxton stepped outside, he carried 2 tin mugs and handed her one without a word. They leaned against the rail, steam rising between them, the silence worn and comfortable. "I cleared the last of the wild rye yesterday," he said. "Won't be much grazing left before long." She nodded. "I can set up preserves this week. There's still enough vinegar to stretch. I'll butcher the hog after the next cold snap. We'll smoke the hams, cure the rest." They stood like that a while longer, the rhythm of shared plans easing into the space between them. Then he glanced sideways. "Caleb's not staying through winter." Rhea looked up. "He's leaving, headed east. His brother wired from Chicago. Wants help with a freight concern." She sipped from her mug. "He won't take the children." "No. Said they're better raised here. Asked me to keep them on." She lowered her cup. "He trusts you that much. I reckon he's come to see what's plain to most folks by now." "And what's that?" Paxton didn't hesitate. "That this is their home. That you're their heart." Rhea set her mug down. "I'll need to hem more winter shirts for Foster. Faye's coat is too short in the sleeves. There's wool in the loft. We'll go through it together later." The breeze picked up, lifting the edge of her shawl. He reached over and tucked it back around her arm, fingers slow and certain. She didn't move away. He kept his voice low. "I've been carving the rings." Her breath caught. "What wood?" "Willow. From down by the creek." She let that settle a moment. "Willow bends but doesn't break. That's why I chose it." She turned toward him fully. "How soon?" "When the ground's hard enough to keep a promise." That night, she sat at the table with a spool of navy thread and the beginnings of a winter shirt stretched across her knees. Paxton worked by lantern light at the far end, his pocket knife moving with care through the pale curve of the willow. Faye sat beside her, tracing the edge of the cloth with her finger. "Are you going to be my new mama?" the girl asked, voice soft but steady. Rhea didn't look up from her stitching. "Would you want that?" Faye nodded. "You braid my hair like she did. But you don't cry after." "I cry sometimes, just not where little ones can see." "Do you miss your people?" Rhea paused. "I miss the ones I lost. But I'd miss you more." Faye leaned against her, small and warm. Later, after the children were in bed, Paxton set the half-finished rings on the windowsill and joined her by the fire. "You never told me what brought you all the way west," he said. She folded the shirt and set it aside. "I was a teacher, in a town where they stopped wanting to learn." He waited. "There was a boy half Choctaw, smart, gentle. They said he didn't belong in my classroom. When I refused to send him away, they came one night and broke every window in the school." Paxton's jaw tightened. "I packed a day later, left behind everything but 2 books, a photograph, and the letter Caleb sent. You could have gone somewhere safer. I chose somewhere honest." He reached out, took her hand where it rested against the cushion. "You chose right." She laced her fingers through his. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." He was quiet for a long time. "My father was a drunk. Mean when he had coin, worse when he didn't. I took my first beating at 6. Left home at 15. Never looked back." She turned to face him. "You built yourself without bitterness. I built myself so no one else ever had to live what I lived." She leaned in, resting her brow against his. "You're the best man I've ever known." He kissed her then, slow and certain, as if it weren't the first time but the last thing either of them would ever need to learn. The next morning, frost glittered on the windowsills, and Rhea found the finished rings beside the folded shirt. She held them in her palm light, smooth, warm from where they'd rested through the night. Outside, Paxton hitched the wagon. "Came to me last night," he said when she stepped out. "We'll say our vows before the first snow." She reached for his hand. "And where?" He smiled with his eyes. "By the dogwoods, where things bloom late but sure." She didn't need to speak. He read her answer in the way she pressed his fingers to her cheek, in the steadiness of her breath as it mingled with his in the cold morning air. Together they rode to town with the children tucked between them, and when they returned, the wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke and something bright, like the promise of a life not borrowed or imagined but fully, deeply their own. The first snow came in the night, quiet as breath. Rhea woke to the hush of it, the kind that pressed close against the windows and softened every edge. She stood at the parlor window wrapped in her shawl, watching the light collect on the fence rails and wagon tongue, everything made clean and still. Paxton's boots were already gone from the doorstep, his tracks leading out toward the barn. She found him there, brushing down the mule with steady strokes, the lantern throwing long shadows across the hay. "The snow came gentle," she said, voice low. "I was hoping it would," he replied, not looking up. "Ground's ready." She stepped further in, the cold nipping at her skirts. "You still want to speak your vows today? If you'll have me." "I will." They didn't need much. Foster and Faye helped her gather pine branches from the grove behind the house, and she tied them with twine and bright thread. The neighbor woman came with her old shawl wrapped 3 times around her middle and a loaf of bread still warm from her hearth. Rhea wore her mother's brooch at the neck of her best calico. Her hands trembled only once, when she slipped the willow ring onto Paxton's finger. "You have my steadiness," she said, holding his gaze. "And you have my strength," he answered, voice rough with feeling. They stood beneath the bare-limbed dogwoods, the snow light on their shoulders, the children between them and the smell of wood smoke rising from the chimney behind. That night, after the neighbor had gone and the children were asleep, Rhea sat on the edge of their bed, unpinning her hair with slow fingers. Paxton knelt to stoke the coals in the stove, then turned and rested his hand on her knee. "I carved something else," he said, reaching into the pocket of his coat. He laid a small box on her lap, the lid fitted snug, the grain of the wood polished smooth. She lifted it open. Inside lay a comb, shaped from the same willow, its teeth fine and even. "I noticed yours cracked along the spine," he said. "Thought you might like one that wouldn't give out." She ran her finger along the curve of it. "It's beautiful. Took me 4 nights. I'll use it every morning." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I want to build you a real room for your sewing come spring. A window that faces the sun." She closed her eyes. "I'd like that." In the days that followed, the snow deepened, and the rhythms of winter settled in. Rhea kept to the kitchen and the loom, her hands always busy, her voice low and sure when she read to the children after supper. Paxton split wood with his coat unbuttoned, his breath thick in the morning air, his presence a constant weight she could lean against without thinking. One evening, as she hemmed a new pair of trousers beside the fire, Foster crouched at her feet, sorting a pile of buttons. "Can I learn the letters like Faye?" he asked. "You can," she said. "Your hands are steadier now." Paxton looked up from his place by the hearth. "He's near carved his name into that fence rail out back, so I'd say he's ready." Rhea glanced at the boy. "You've been practicing?" Foster grinned. "Only when you weren't looking." She reached down and brushed his hair back. "Then we'll start tomorrow." Later, as she folded the finished trousers, Paxton stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Your voice changes when you talk to them." "How?" "Like you're speaking to something sacred." She let herself lean into him. "Maybe I am." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "You changed everything. I only added what was missing." I didn't know I could feel this full. She turned in his arms, her hands resting on his chest. You were already whole. I just gave you someone to share it with. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and steady. Inside, the stove crackled, the fire low and even. And in the quiet of that room, with the scent of pine and ash in the air and his hands warm on her back, she knew there would be no more leaving. Only mornings that rose slow and sure. Only hands that found each other across the table. Only love, every day, exactly as it was earned, lived, and lasting. The snow gave way to thaw by late March, seeping down through the soil, loosening the earth Paxton had marked for spring planting. The land, once locked in frost, now gave beneath his boots with every step. The air smelled of wet bark and turned loam, and when the wind shifted, it carried the sharp scent of the river breaking open again. Rhea stood at the edge of the field, apron tied snug and her hands streaked with flour. She watched as Paxton and Foster worked the hand plow deeper into the southern strip. The boy's shoulders bent in mimicry beside the man he so clearly followed in step. Faye sat nearby with a basket of darning, threading her needle with a squint of determination. Foster's taller than he was at the first freeze, Rhea said once Paxton neared her, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. He's outgrown 2 pairs of boots since then, he replied, laying the plow down slow. I've had to cut slits in the back of his heel just to stretch the wear. I'll trade with the tailor's widow in Fairpine next week, she said. I still have the recipe for salve she asked after. Paxton nodded, then looked past her toward the house. You've planted yourself here same as these crops. I'm glad for it. He stepped closer, brushing a streak of soil from her wrist with his thumb. You still think about what you gave up? She met his gaze. Only when I need to remind myself why I chose this life over that one. He tilted his head, quiet for a moment. And why did you? She reached for his hand, pressing it flat against her belly, where the faintest curve had begun to rise beneath her apron. Because this is where the next part of me begins. His breath caught. You're sure? I've counted 3 months, no bleeding. I've known since the second. Paxton let his hand linger, fingers splayed wide. You didn't tell me. I wanted to wait, she said, until we were standing in the thaw, with things coming alive again. His voice was low. You're carrying our child. I am. He bent and pressed his forehead to hers, his other hand sliding behind her neck. Then everything I ever hoped for is already here. That night, after the children were tucked in with bellies full of roasted onions and rye bread, Rhea sat at the table, sorting dried sage and marigold petals into muslin sachets. Paxton held her feet in his lap, rubbing the arches through her stockings with calloused thumbs. What would you name the child if it's a girl? She asked. Clara, he said without pause. After your mother. She looked down. You never met her. I didn't need to. She raised the woman I love. Rhea let the thread fall from her fingers. And if it's a boy? He thought a moment. Eben. Old name. Strong. She smiled. Then we'll make room for a Clara or an Eben. In April, they hitched the wagon and rode to the mill by the river, trading preserved fruit and hand-sewn linens for a bushel of fresh milled corn and a small tin box of licorice drops. Faye rode between them, her hair tied back with a ribbon Rhea had dyed with beetroot. Foster stayed behind with the neighbor woman, helping her split kindling and mind her hens. On the way back, Paxton drew the wagon to a slow stop beneath a stand of blooming chokecherry. We'll build the cradle from one of these, he said, gesturing to the trees. Good wood. Sweet-smelling. Rhea laid a hand on his knee. It'll be a lucky child. He covered her hand with his. It'll be a loved one. By midsummer, the crops stood knee-high, and Rhea's belly showed plainly beneath her dresses. She rose with the sun and rested when the heat climbed too high, her tasks slower now, but steady. Faye followed her like a shadow, carrying baskets and fetching herbs from the garden bed Paxton had built just outside the kitchen window. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air cooled, Rhea sat on the porch with a bowl of shelled peas in her lap. Foster and Faye chased fireflies across the yard, their laughter high and full. Paxton sat beside her, knife in hand, whittling the last curve of the cradle's rail. "You never told me," she said. "What made you stay on this land after your father passed?" He didn't look up from the wood. "I used to think leaving would set me free. But the longer I stayed, the more I saw how healing can live in the same place as hurt." She nodded. "Then we've both grown something out of the scar." He set the carving knife down and reached for her hand. "You and I, we're not just surviving anymore. We're rooted." She let her fingers curl around his. "And blooming." That fall, they buried the last of the harvest in the cellar and laid straw to bed over the garden rows. The baby came on a cold morning in late October. After a long night lit by oil lamp and cooled by cloths Paxton dipped in the basin himself. Rhea brought their child into the world with grit in her teeth and his name on her lips. It was a girl. They named her Clara. Foster carved her name into a piece of scrap pine and nailed it above the cradle. Faye sang to her in whispers songs she made up as she went. Paxton watched from the doorway. "You built this life," he said one evening, watching Rhea rock Clara slow in the dusk. She looked up. "We built it." He crossed the room and knelt beside her, the firelight soft on his face. "I'll never stop choosing you." She leaned into him. "Nor I you." And in that home, with the scent of wood smoke and milk and earth, with their children's laughter echoing down the hall and the wind combing through the fields they'd sown together, they lived on. Bound not by chance or necessity, but by love steady, growing, and true.